Hello and welcome to the Infotech CIO Strategy Podcast.
It's great to be here.
Today, we're diving into a topic that's pretty crucial for any CIO who's staring down the barrel of a merger or an acquisition. We're talking about how CIOs can really take the reins and steer those M&A efforts from that initial due diligence phase all the way through to a smooth integration.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we've got a fantastic resource to guide us through this complex landscape, and it comes from the brilliant mind of Manish Jain, the Principal Director for CIO Strategy here at Infotech.
He's a real thought leader in this space.
He's authored some incredibly insightful research, and we're going to tap into that today. You know, when you think about M&As, it's easy to get swept up in the excitement of it all, the potential for growth and synergy. But let's be real for a second. The Harvard Business Review drops a pretty sobering statistic. Somewhere between 70 and 90% of mergers and acquisitions, they just don't deliver on those initial promises.
It's a pretty stark reality check.
It is. It really is. Think about it. That's basically saying you've got, at best, a coin flip's chance of actually hitting those goals you set out for yourself. And that kind of uncertainty, that can send ripples of anxiety throughout an entire organization.
For sure. And that's exactly where Infotech's research comes in, specifically that M&A IT playbook that Manish Jain put together. It's all about injecting some much-needed order and predictability into what can often feel like, a bit of a chaotic whirlwind of a process, especially when you factor in all the complexities of technology, which, let's be honest, is pretty much unavoidable in today's business world.
Right. I mean, tech is the backbone of everything these days.
Exactly. And this is something that Manish's research really underscores. According to Infotech Insights, we're looking at technology enabling something like 30 to 60% of those business synergies that we all hope to achieve during an M&A. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. Less than 56% of folks who are actually making those critical decisions, they're not fully considering the IT challenges during that crucial due diligence phase.
It's a little bit like building a house on a foundation you haven't properly inspected, right?
It's a recipe for disaster. So in this deep dive, we're going to break this whole journey down for you, starting with the fundamental reasons behind an M&A, why companies even choose to go down this path, all the way through to that often overlooked post-integration review.
Sounds comprehensive.
We'll zero in on the CIO's crucial role at each stage and how that M&A IT playbook provides like a roadmap, a structured way to navigate these complexities. We might even toss in a few real-world examples. We've got a fictional company we like to call Acquire a Co.
Our case study.
Exactly. Just to illustrate how a well-defined playbook can make all the difference.
So let's set the stage right. Let's start with the big picture, the M&A landscape itself. What are the core drivers, the motivations that are pushing companies to join forces in the first place?
Well, you see a few strategic themes pop up time and time again. You've got the drive for operational efficiency that's all about streamlining processes, cutting out redundancies, doing more with less.
Makes sense.
Growth is another big one, whether it's about expanding into new markets, geographically, going global, or just capturing a larger share of their existing market.
Absolutely.
And revenue growth is closely tied to that. Tapping into a larger customer base, cross-selling opportunities, maybe gaining access to some new product lines.
Diversification.
Exactly. Then there's the desire to acquire new capabilities. Maybe the target company has cutting-edge technology, some valuable intellectual property, a team with specialized skills that the acquiring company needs to bolster their own offerings.
Right.
Cost synergies through economies of scale are always on the table too. And sometimes it's about managing risk or responding to those, inevitable shifts in the industry landscape, maybe regulatory changes that are forcing companies to adapt and evolve.
It's interesting, though, because you've laid out this buffet of potential benefits, but as we touched on earlier, many of these grand plans, they kind of stumble and fall flat. What are the most common culprits behind those M&A failures?
The research consistently points to two main stumbling blocks. Inadequate due diligence, that's basically not doing your homework thoroughly enough, not truly understanding the ins and outs of the company you're acquiring.
The risks.
And the other one is ineffective integration planning. So even if the due diligence is solid, if you don't have a clear and executable plan for how to actually bring these two entities together post-deal, that's where things can really unravel.
Right. It's like a bad marriage.
It is. It's all about compatibility. And that 70 to 75% failure rate we talked about, that's not just bad luck. Think back to the AOL-Time Warner merger. That was a massive $165 billion deal. And it's often cited as a cautionary tale, largely because there wasn't a clear shared vision for how these two very different companies with their own unique cultures and ways of doing business, how they would actually function as a unified entity. Everyone saw the potential, the shiny object syndrome, but the roadmap for actually getting there was, well, a little bit fuzzy.
That's a mind-boggling amount of money to just disappear.
It is. And it really highlights the importance of that initial due diligence phase. Manish Jain, in his research, he really emphasizes this point. Due diligence is often where the cracks start to show. CIOs have reported uncovering some pretty significant issues during IT due diligence that had a real tangible impact on the deal's value.
Costly surprises.
Right. Sometimes leading to remediation costs of like US $8 million or more.
Wow.
And there's even one example where mismanaged due diligence contributed to an $8.8 billion write-down in an $11 billion deal.
Ouch.
Yeah, that's not chump change.
Yeah.
That's a massive consequence of not doing your homework up front.
Yeah, those figures really drive home the point that this isn't just a box-ticking exercise. It's about protecting significant investments.
It absolutely is. And you know what's interesting? When you look at companies that are serial acquirers, the ones that do these deals frequently, they tend to have a much higher success rate. In North America, they outperform less frequent acquirers by a significant margin, something like 129%.
So they're learning from their mistakes.
Exactly. It's not just the quantity of deals they do, but the fact that they learn from each experience and they codify those learnings into their M&A playbook. It becomes like a living, breathing document, constantly evolving with each new acquisition.
So experience really is a strategic advantage in this game.
It is.
Okay, so let's get practical. Let's talk about actually building one of these M&A IT playbooks. Where do you even start?
The foundation, the absolute starting point, is making sure that your IT strategy is in lockstep with the overarching M&A strategy. You need to understand the why, the fundamental reasons the organization is pursuing this deal. Is it about gaining market share, acquiring new technology, cutting costs, or something else entirely?
The big picture.
Exactly. What are the specific objectives, the metrics they'll be using to measure success? Remember, the M&A itself isn't the end goal. It's a means to an end.
It's a vehicle.
Exactly.
Okay, so understanding the why is like setting your compass. What's the next crucial step in building this foundation?
Defining your integration expectations. What level of interconnectedness are you aiming for between the two organizations after the merger?
Okay.
Are you going for a full integration where you're adopting one set of systems and processes, or is it more about connecting the essentials while allowing them to operate somewhat independently?
And what does that mean for the IT department specifically?
That's the key question. What's the anticipated integration posture for each of those technology streams?
That's a good point. It's not one size fits all.
Exactly. And here's where looking back can be really valuable. Reviewing past M&A transactions, if you have them, through a structured lens like a stop, start, continue framework can yield some incredible insights.
Interesting.
Across areas like value realization, governance, due diligence, and integration, ask yourselves, what worked really well that we should keep doing? What absolutely didn't work needs to be tossed out? And what are some new approaches we should try?
So turning past experiences into actionable intelligence.
Exactly.
What else is fundamental to building a solid playbook?
Developing those organizational brief profiles, both for the acquiring company and the target company. You're essentially capturing their key characteristics. Their core business, financial health, operational models, their customer demographics, the tech landscape, any intellectual property they have, regulatory considerations, potential risks. It's like painting a picture of each company before you try to blend them together.
A snapshot.
Exactly. For example, our fictional acquirer co., they're a global retail bank, heavily invested in digital transformation, operating under strict regulatory oversight.
Right.
Now, let's say they're looking at a potential target, like Target Co. Bank, a smaller, digitally native bank with a cloud-first infrastructure, known for great customer satisfaction. By putting those two profiles side by side, you can start to see potential areas of synergy, compatibility, but also potential points of friction.
Makes sense.
And to go even deeper, analyzing their value chains, essentially, the core activities each company performs to deliver value to their customers. For Acquirer Co., as a bank, you're talking about customer acquisition, account management, lending services, regulatory compliance. If they were looking at a completely different type of company, like, say, a mining company, their value chain would look totally different, focusing on things like exploration, extraction, processing. Understanding those value chains helps you identify the key integration points where those two worlds are going to collide.
Where they need to mesh.
Exactly. And it's also about understanding their core business capabilities, what each company does exceptionally well. That helps you spot opportunities for leveraging those unique strengths or identifying potential gaps that need to be addressed during the integration.
Right, so it's not just about the activities, but the expertise behind them.
Exactly. And finally, you need to articulate the specific characteristics of this particular deal. What are the strategic goals driving it? What's the desired end state for the combined entity? What's the planned IT integration posture? Are you going for a full absorption, a best-of-breed approach, or something else? And what type of deal is it, a small tuck-in acquisition or a major merger of equals?
So it's about tailoring the playbook to this specific situation.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we've built the foundation for our IT playbook. We've defined our strategic parameters. And now we get to that critical due diligence phase. What's the CIO's role in this stage?
This is where the CIO really needs to step up and advocate for the importance of IT. Manish Jain's research highlights that IT is often, unfortunately, left out of those initial due diligence discussions.
Really?
It happens. Sometimes it's because IT is viewed as a support function, a cost center, not a strategic player.
A misconception.
It is. Or maybe there's this naive assumption that the technology will just magically work together once the deal is done. But ignoring IT during due diligence is a huge risk. It's the CIO's job to push for early involvement, to uncover potential tech-related landmines that could derail the entire deal.
So what are the must-examine areas for IT during due diligence?
You're looking at several critical areas. First, the IT infrastructure, that's the servers, the networks, the data centers, the cloud environments.
The backbone.
Exactly. You need to assess their compatibility, identify potential bottlenecks, and start planning for how you're going to maintain operations and eventually integrate those systems. Cybersecurity is absolutely paramount. You need to dive deep into their security policies, vulnerability assessments, how they respond to incidents, their compliance with regulations.
Right.
Applications of the nature, you need a thorough inventory of their critical business systems, understand their functionality, licensing issues, and their readiness for integration. Data is another key area. You're looking at data quality, data governance practices, and how feasible it will be to integrate their data with yours. Then you've got their vendors and contracts, understanding their key IT suppliers, the terms of those agreements, their performance history. Don't forget about the people and culture side. How is their IT organization structured? What are the skills and experience levels of their team? How well does their IT culture align with yours?
The human element.
Right. And finally, you need to review their IT budgets and their compliance with all the relevant technology regulations.
That's quite a checklist.
It is. And for each of those areas, you need to define specific objectives for your due diligence.
Can you give me an example?
Sure, let's take infrastructure. Your objectives might be to determine the level of compatibility between the two companies' existing infrastructures.
Okay.
Ensure that critical systems continue to operate smoothly during the transition. Develop a concrete plan for integrating the infrastructure components, and proactively identify and mitigate any potential risks, like outdated hardware or single points of failure.
Thanks.
For each objective, you want to examine specific artifacts, network diagrams, server inventories, cloud agreements, that sort of thing. And you do the same for each of those other areas, cybersecurity, applications, and so on.
So it's about being systematic and thorough.
Exactly.
You mentioned people and culture earlier. How do you even begin to assess something as intangible as cultural compatibility during due diligence?
It's a great question. It's a softer side, but it can make or break the integration. There are frameworks out there, like McLean & Co.'s M&A culture assessment, that provide a structured approach.
Okay.
They look at a range of cultural drivers, things like risk tolerance, leadership styles, communication styles, how they define success. The goal is to understand how well these two organizational personalities will mesh.
Right, because you could have the best tech in the world, but if the people can't work together...
It's a recipe for disaster.
What about all the potential risks that you inevitably uncover during due diligence? How do you manage those?
You need a solid risk management framework. First, you categorize each risk based on the IT domain it falls under. Then you prioritize them based on their potential impact on those synergies you're hoping to achieve and the likelihood of the risk actually materializing. Tools like a risk register and a risk matrix can be really helpful for visualizing that. High impact, high likelihood risks, those need immediate attention and could even influence the decision of whether to move forward with the deal at all.
Makes sense.
For every risk, You assign an owner who's responsible for developing and implementing mitigation strategies.
So it's not just about finding the problems, it's about having a plan to address them.
Exactly.
So how do you take all that due diligence information and make a go-no-go decision on the deal?
A scoring rubric can be useful. You assign a risk level, low, medium, or high, to each key finding within each IT domain. For example, if you discover they need a major infrastructure overhaul, that might be a medium risk, whereas a bunch of unaddressed cybersecurity vulnerabilities would be a high risk. You aggregate those scores across all the areas, and that gives you an overall IT due diligence risk assessment. A high overall score might mean you need to renegotiate the deal terms, adjust your integration plans, or even walk away.
It's a deal breaker.
It could be. A low score gives you more confidence to move forward.
So let's assume we've made it through due diligence, the deal's a go. What happens next? What's the CIO's role in the post-merger integration?
This is where the rubber meets the road.
The real work begins.
Exactly. Even before day one, before the deal officially closes, you need to define clear M&A success measures, specifically for IT. Not just vague aspirations, but concrete KPIs, things like percentage of critical IT assets inventoried within the first 30 days, or system uptime for key business applications post-integration.
Measurable goals.
Exactly. How are you going to track these KPIs? What dashboards will you use? When will you review them? This gives you a way to gauge the success of your IT integration efforts.
Right. Otherwise, how do you know if you're actually achieving what you set out to do?
Exactly. And then you need a clear governance structure for managing this whole integration process. You'll typically have two key groups. The M&A Steering Committee, which is that high-level executive group overseeing the entire M&A strategy, and the CIO needs to be part of that conversation.
Absolutely.
And then you'll have a dedicated M&A Tech Governance Council, the IT team, responsible for driving the technical integration. This group, usually led by a designated CIO, will include leaders from all the different IT areas, infrastructure, security, applications, data.
So you've got the strategic oversight and the tactical execution.
Exactly. And don't underestimate the importance of communication during this phase. You need a comprehensive plan to keep everyone informed, internal and external stakeholders throughout the entire process.
It's a lot of people to keep in the loop.
It is. Customers, vendors, regulators, your own IT teams, executives, business unit leaders, employees impacted by the integration. They all need to be kept informed.
Clear communication is key. Okay, so how do you actually start blending the technology environments? Which systems stay, which go? How do they get integrated?
This is where that IT integration posture you defined earlier comes into play. Absorption, best of breed, preservation, or transformation.
Right.
That choice will heavily influence your target technology end state. For example, if our acquirer co has a really strong cybersecurity infrastructure, they might choose an absorption approach for that domain. Basically, decommissioning target co security systems and migrating everything to their own platform.
It's about picking the best of both worlds, or in this case, maybe just sticking with what works.
Exactly. And you need a solid rationale for each integration posture you choose.
Okay, all this integration work, it comes with a cost. How do you manage that financial aspect?
You need to estimate both the cost synergies, the savings you expect to achieve, and the incremental costs of the integration itself.
The two sides of the coin.
Exactly. You'll need to look at personnel costs, infrastructure upgrades, application migration, data consolidation, everything, and quantify both the potential savings and the additional expenses.
So you can get a clear picture of the return on investment.
Exactly.
We often hear about transition service agreements or TSAs in the M&A world. Can you explain those and the CIO's role?
TSA is basically a contract between the buyer and the seller that outlines the specific IT services the seller will continue to provide after the deal closes. It's a way to ensure business continuity while the integration is happening.
Okay.
The CIO and their team, they play a key role in defining the technical details of the TSA, what services are needed, the service levels, the costs, and the exit criteria as the buyer becomes self-sufficient.
So the TSA is a bridge.
Exactly. It helps smooth that transition period.
Once you've got the TSA in place, how do you know when you're ready to move from planning the integration to actually executing it?
You do a readiness assessment similar to the due diligence assessment, but focus specifically on integration readiness. You might use a comfort level scoring system, again, low, medium, or high.
Okay.
You're asking, is the TSA finalized? Are risk mitigation plans in place? Are the integration teams ready to roll?
It's a final checkpoint before you go live.
Exactly.
So what are some of those key integration initiatives that the CIO and their team will be tackling?
It will vary, depending on the specific situation, of course, but you'll typically see some common themes. For infrastructure, it might involve connecting networks, migrating users and data, consolidating vendor contracts, and potentially rationalizing data centers.
Right.
For cybersecurity, it could be harmonizing security policies, integrating threat detection systems, standardizing endpoint protection. Application integration might involve migrating customer-facing apps to a unified platform, integrating key back-end systems, and maybe even modernizing legacy systems.
That's a lot.
It is. On the data side, you might be aligning data classification standards, stabilizing data pipelines, and unifying data analytics platforms. Vendor management will focus on assessing current vendors, consolidating contracts, ensuring regulatory compliance, and for the people and culture piece, you're talking about establishing a unified IT structure, harmonizing compensation, and fostering that new integrated culture within the combined IT team.
How do you keep track of all of that?
That's where the M&A integration IT roadmap comes in.
Okay.
It's a consolidated view of all those initiatives, their dependencies, their timelines, who's responsible for what. You might use a Gantt chart or similar project management tool to visualize that. It's your roadmap for the entire IT integration journey.
Essential for staying on track.
Absolutely. And just like you did a readiness assessment before planning, you'll do one more before execution.
To make sure everyone's ready.
Exactly. Are the teams staffed? Do they have the necessary access? Are the vendor contracts in place? It's that last check to make sure everything's aligned before you flip the switch.
So what's the final step in this whole M&A journey?
It's the post-integration review, where you take a step back and assess how it all went.
The lessons learned.
Exactly. How did you perform against those KPIs you defined at the beginning? Did you achieve the expected synergies? Did IT contribute to the overall success of the M&A?
It's about measuring the impact.
It is. And it's about capturing those lessons learned in a structured way. What worked well? What should you avoid next time? What should you keep doing? You can use that start, stop, continue framework again here.
So it's a continuous improvement cycle.
Exactly. And all of this feeds back into your M&A IT playbook. That playbook becomes a living document, constantly being updated with the lessons learned from each new deal.
A repository of best practices.
Exactly. And as Manish Jain highlights in his research, having that playbook, using it consistently, it can significantly increase your chances of M&A success.
That's a powerful message. So to wrap things up, we've seen how crucial the CIO's role is in leading M&A efforts.
From due diligence to integration, it's all about being strategic, proactive, and having a clear roadmap.
And having that M&A IT playbook can really make all the difference. It's about turning what can feel like a risky gamble into a more predictable, value-driven process. And on that note, we want to let you know about some upcoming research from Infotech that dives even deeper into this topic. It's called Develop Your M&A IT Playbook.
So be sure to check that out.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us today, and we'll catch you next time on the Infotech CIO Strategy Podcast.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Bye.